Hello, I'm Matt Wyman, CEO and co-founder of Acario. Acario provides agent simulation. We simulate users to break your agents before your customers do. Today, I have the pleasure of meeting Romella Janene here.
Yeah,
Join me
thank you.
today to meet. Oh, I'm just going to redo that because I blew your name. I'm sorry. I'm going to just redo
No,
that.
that's okay. All right.
It's funny. I rarely do it, but okay. So today, I have the pleasure of having Romella Janene have a conversation with us about data analytics, huge history both in government sector and then outside as well, working with enterprise organizations and others, thinking about the future of how we think about data, how we work with data and AI. Janine, Romella, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Matt. I'm excited to be here. This should be a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Um, when we spoke last, you talked a bit about your journey as a consumer and looking at data, and you really sort of found this data advocacy. And I wonder if you could tell that story again, because I think it really creates an interesting grounding for larger conversation.
Sure. So, you know, early on, this is like back in 2017, there was not, sort of the broad recognition of LLM and, AI and chatbots and all of that. But there were problems with data breaches that were popping up.
Mm,
And like all of the big data breaches that you can think of at that time, including, of the federal government, I was unfortunate or lucky enough to be unfortunate to have been a victim of.
mm,
And it really kind of just stuck in my craw that there was a lot of collecting of data, but inadequate safeguarding of it. And so I began to get involved in internet governance. And, through Internet Governance Forum, which is part of UN, US chapter of that, I began, advocating for uh, better treatment of our data, from the consumer side. Um, and it was through that process of participating in those, multi-stakeholder interest group meetings on, all things internet governance, that I really did get a better understanding of how data was being used. And, if folks are not aware of this, the first LLMs were basically built by scraping data from the entirety of the internet. And there certainly wasn't, my permission or permission, anyone's permission for this data to be harvested in the way that it was. But that's so long ago now that the cat is out of the bag. But there are some issues now that are being litigated around how that data was gathered and who gave permission, who didn't. Recent lawsuit concerning authors was settled with it was OpenAI, or it might have been Microsoft, one of the two, around how the data was harvested without, the permission of the authors. It was basically used to train, these models that we're all using every day. Similar concerns around, all parts of the entertainment industry and just in general. One of the more sort of, and I forget the name of the company, but there was a company that basically harvested data from LinkedIn in a way that LinkedIn did not agree with. And, I didn't agree to have my data used by this random company, using a spider and going and grabbing it. And we probably didn't agree either, but they went and did it. And, it's interesting to see, and I'm not a lawyer, just, um, having done expert witness stuff for it, different types of cases. But, I will say that it's not settled. It's not a settled issue at all. In the LinkedIn case, it didn't go in the favor of LinkedIn, but authors won. So like the ownership of data, who owns data? There's all of these data governance frameworks, GDPR, and its successor in Europe, California, something up in Illinois. But all of that is kind of what got me into AI, just really kind of seeing like how the data was being used and what could be done with it. And it was in 2017 that I started the process of um, trying to get a utility patent for for AI and the successor blockchain, which was actually granted last November. So
Well,
um,
congratulations.
thank you. So have IP in AI.
It's amazing. It is awfully difficult because there's so much information that is considered to be public, and yet when people were creating it, quite often, and I'm not suggesting this is a good thing, but it was a reality. It was security by obscurity, right?
Yeah,
People assumed that a lot of this information was obscure, hard to find, in the corners, wasn't going to be looked at. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it, you know, but it certainly sets this stage of what's private versus public. And so here, to your point, we have, and the language models were not possible without this large corpus of data, but
that's right.
now we're starting to see it mixed. Now we're starting to see other large sets of data that are within some sort of boundary, whether it's a corporate boundary, a government boundary, or some other boundary. So now those are starting to be pulled into models and sort of crossed over, if you will. And so then I wonder, given your experience and your thoughts around the advocacy in the more the public space, how are you thinking about the intersection of these data sets and what it causes in terms of how much we know about individuals?
I mean, there is a real concern. Before I go too deep into that, I will say that um, I am in favor of what has been created up to this point. It's about being responsible with how it's being used. And, if someone raises their hand saying, don't include me, finding out a way to ensure that that request is honored, I think is where I am at in terms of, inclusion I mean, it would be great if we could have opt-in, but just the way in which the data is gathered, it may not always be possible to have opt-in be the option as opposed to opting out. But having said that, I mean, when I was working in government, I had the pleasure of being involved in the development of the civilian labor force statistics that are available on census.gov. Um, and we had a lot of data, governance type discussions about, how much information is too much information. How low should you be able to go in crisscrossing the data before you bump into like, hey, that's Sally Sue that lives on, this block and works at this organization and does the,
Hmm.
and it's surprisingly um, quick before you bump into that. You don't need as much combining of different data sources before you reach the point of being able to identify someone. And so the question becomes, when is it appropriate to think about combining data? Because even if you are working with a data set, let's say from, census.gov that has been, treated with the utmost care in ensuring that individuals cannot be identified, but then you go over here and you grab, some data from some data broker for that same geography, you come over here to maybe, some credit card data usage, and boom, there's Sally Sue, and she's been at this supermarket and she bought this, and you might even know like super personal things about her biology that would not be something Sally Sue would want someone random knowing. Um, so there are really true concerns about this, and that's why I think things like GDPR and its successor and the California privacy and what New York City is doing and Denver. I mean, there's lots of different places now that have really sort of leaned into thinking about privacy because of AI. And I think it's working itself out. I have faith.
I'm well, I'm glad. The Because it seems like, from what I understand, within three or four pieces of data, you can identify an individual, or certainly
Yeah,
get very, very close.
yeah.
Your point about knowing a little bit of their purchase history resonates strongly because they can tell you all sorts of different
Mhm.
information about family conditions, health conditions, environment, activity. But now, as we start to also bring in, companies that know, what feed they're watching, what shows they're watching, what they're looking at, what they're consuming, starts to give you behavioral information, starts to give you,
Absolutely.
and that's existed. It's not as though these things didn't exist. They just weren't all interconnected quite as quickly. And then Of
not
course
as
there will be.
efficient.
Exactly. Exactly. And then there's this notion that, well, we'll clean it up and we'll give access. Like, how can you actually clean that? And so I wonder about this sort of the ethical concerns as people are building and working in this space. It's going to require um, some self-reflection. It if we go unchecked, simply everything will become known. So there will have to be people who make the decision not to bring some of this together and not to put it into the world, because I don't know that that there can be an outside force that actually comes in and enforces some sort of regulation that blocks certain types of data from being intersected, because regulations typically are back facing, not forward facing. So to me, there's an ethical concern here where people need to be thinking about what they're building and whether and how it will be used. And this is a space where everyone's pushing boundaries right now.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of thought about how to manage it. So given your experiences, how do you see that playing out? Where do you think the
Well,
levers are?
I mean, everyone's racing to be first. So, because there is this race to be first among the LLM providers, um, they're not necessarily thinking about even if one model is better than the other that they're putting out. I mean, just this morning, I saw that they're finally starting to think about A and B testing, weekly releases of models. And now, like, okay, we're putting out this model this week. Is it actually better than what we put out last week? And I would think, as part of that A and B testing, there needs to be this thought about, privacy policies. How much information, is having like a set of random people that they kind of check and see, like, okay, does this model with a little bit of prompting give me this person, these people, or not? And trying to look at it that in that way in terms of A and B testing, I think is one thing that could be helpful. But I think broader auditing, on a regular routine basis, by the companies that are developing it is going to have to be part of it. But like when we're talking about the initial build, we have to take a human-centered approach. What is actually necessary to deliver the good or service that we're trying to deliver to our respective customers and not overreach. It's like, I'll use like a survey example. You can ask 10 questions, to your people when they're signing up for your service, right? But do you need all 10 pieces of those information? It would be nice to have, but do you really need it? And you should be thinking about that, because what is the realistic probability of you always being able to keep it safe? And that's near zero. I mean, the Pentagon's been hit, right?
Right. Yeah, it is near zero. I'm
So I think, taking time to think about what information do we absolutely need to have, and trying to think about in terms of training your organization's customization of this large model, and not throw everything that you could about your customer in there, but just the things that are needed to, let's say, you have a chat bot on your website and they want to know where's my order. There's obviously certain things that you would not need to include when they're just
Mhm.
trying to find out from your bot, where's my order. You may need their order history, but do you need the full order history?
Right.
No.
Right.
So even for that, let alone like, you know, their address, I mean, all of the other things that could be on the scope of what they're trying to accomplish with that and what you as the organization is trying to accomplish. So I think just being mindful in terms of your end user and what it is that they want to accomplish, and what you as an organization, was what problem are you trying to solve? So
Well, I do
that's
think we're also going to see some consumer influence here too. I mean, certainly consumers are becoming more aware of data and data privacy. I think AI is bringing more awareness to that. And certainly we have every generation seems to be more data literate than the last. And I do
yes.
think we're going to see some services that don't get used because people simply don't want to expose that information. Or I've seen this in some younger folks, an intentional misuse where they misrepresent. So they know they're consciously misrepresenting themselves, so as to cast a particular shadow in that one service versus another service where they may cast a different shadow. I do think
That is
I'm
such an
absolutely with you
interesting.
on the models. Hmm.
No, that's such an interesting point that you brought up because there was a fairly recent survey done, and I want to say it was by KPMG or something. Yeah, it was KPMG. And I want to say it was like over 40% of employees were using AI in either unauthorized or inappropriate ways.
So that's interesting. And then, well, who decides what appropriate and inappropriate is? That's also an
I mean,
interesting.
if you're an organization, right? And here's the other thing, I believe in it was a different survey, might have been the same survey, that only like 17% of companies had an organizational policy around AI usage. So, if you haven't, or dear organization, if you haven't taken the time to prescribe and lay out like what is our AI posture, when do you use it, when don't you use it, your employees could be feeding your corporate secrets to
And
chat
this is actually what I was
GPT.
going to exactly. And this is the comment I was going to make about the models. So a lot of responsibility does sit in OpenAI and Google and elsewhere and Facebook where models are being built. But I'm at least half the responsibility is also on the sides of the application builders and the people consuming those models and how they consume the models and how they put them together and clarity about how those applications are being built. So when you're typing into a little text box is supposed to be helping you, where did that actually wind up? Where did it go
Right.
in the long run? You may trust, you may, within quotes, trust the application directly in front of you, but you don't know 2 and 3 steps later where that went. And I do think that at other times we've seen some transparency. I don't think it's an anathema to have transparency in these different areas. It's just not a habit we have yet, and people aren't asking for it yet.
And even like to what layer, because so I'll give an example, through 321 Circle, I provide chatbots and training services for AI and those sorts of things to companies. Um, but so I'll get like messages, I'm basically running off of like Google's version of LLMs. And so I'll occasionally get emails from Google saying, hey, we're using these new processors, for
Hmm.
our data. It's like this company located here, 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 and their content distribution networks to try and, ensure speed, or for whatever reason, there's these intermediary processors, and they occasionally send out emails. Now, am I going to repackage that list to an end user who's just trying to find out where their order is?
Yeah. Yeah. And could you possibly do the aggregate of all those lists?
I mean, it keeps growing. I mean, they're adding to these processors. So it's like, literally, there could be a company in Timbuktu that maybe because of where you're sitting, test your data for a little bit before you got your answer back. Just it's very interesting to think about all of those things. But I think the thing that is most um, where the model providers have really decided to take some ownership was the idea of, hey, we're providing these big models and we want, other, businesses to use our models to create new products and services for their customers. And so to encourage the use of their models, they're basically indemnifying you. Like if there's something that pops up with our model that you used, um, hey, it's not on you, dear customer, but send them our way and we'll deal with it. Because the reality is, uh, if it's a problem for company A, it's a problem for company B through Z that's also using it.
Yep.
So
Well,
taking that approach, but then even to be able to indemnify, that meant that there needed to be finally some understanding of the risks associated with this, so that the insurers would jump in and provide that.
it comes back to the point you made a few moments ago, which I also think is incredibly interesting. The whether or not employees are actually allowed, or if there is a policy that's been established for how and which applications can be used and how they can be used and what data can be put into them. But on the flip side, we are expecting people to go become as native as they possibly can be with these new capabilities so they can essentially manage their own careers going forward. So if you're in a company that hasn't articulated a clear policy about how you can use AI and which products are acceptable and which aren't, and not just whether you can use it, but what data you're allowed to actually put into
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
I
For
suspect that's
what
actually
parts
the
of your job?
majority. Exactly. So it puts you in a dilemma. Like, y- you know that there's been this sort of over, I think everyone at this point is aware that there's this overarching threat and concern about AI, digital employees, whatever you want to call it, coming in and taking over tasks. And yet there's plenty of room, there's plenty of tasks that are not getting done in organizations. So then how are you helping people navigate that concern of I need to be using AI in order to continue to expand my role, my capabilities, my, I'll put in loose terms, value, although it's hard to articulate that way. And on the other side, the corporate side, where they need to be thinking about, well, how do we roll this out? How do we incentivize people to experiment?
Yeah, so that's such an interesting question. I mean, the at the highest level, I would say it's all about like your strategy, your vision, your mission for what type of organization are you? You know, what is your organization's culture? Because people have to feel like it's okay to try something and fail. You know, they
Hmm.
have to be comfortable with taking a risk, and just feeling like, okay, if this doesn't go well, I'm still going to have a job. You know, to the extent that someone's really, you know, kind of punished, for lack of a gracious way to say it, for, you know, making a mistake, you're going to have lower sort of innovation in that organization in all realms, including AI. So really having a culture, you know, within that prizes people for, you know, being willing to take a risk and to try something new. Hey, you know, here's this AI tool. We want to give it to our workforce. Just try it out. You know, we're not necessarily committed to keeping it. Here it is. You know, try it out. Tell us what you ended up doing with it. You know, and then from there, maybe you could work back and say, okay, so and so did this. It turned out great, but we're not really comfortable with the risks associated with that. So even though it was great, we recognize that, but we don't want to assume that risk. You know, so and so tried this, it didn't work out, but with some tweaks or whatever, that was a good idea. We can find some ways to make that work. So just sort of giving room, you know, for employees to experiment, I think is really important. But in terms of like what organizations can do, you know, organizations are saying, hey, use AI tools, maybe not even providing AI tools, but just we want you to go and do that self-training, that self-learning and all of that. But you want me to use it, but you yourself aren't really providing me with the training. So, you know, my interest is in this way. And you organization maybe would want me to learn about AI like this. Well, you organization need to provide the type of AI training that you want me to use in my job. And, you know, there's really some startling statistics around that where, you know, I think it's maybe 6 in 10 feel like that they're, you know, not really being given the type of training that they need around AI, but then they're being expected to use it. Um, you know, but, you know, employees at the same time recognize that there's this big opportunity to be doing things differently with AI. Um, but, you know, not necessarily trusting that it's going to give them what they think they're getting out of it. You know, it's like, I want to use it, I want to experiment, you know, but can I trust what it told me?
Right, right, right. But also there's an interesting tension there between experimentation, risk of failure, not being told how to use something, and then on the other side, the more structured training. This is how to use it. This is when to use it. This is where to use it, etc. I think we're not there yet. I don't think
No.
we know precisely on the one side, and I won't say that experimentation and risk of failure are things that are difficult. Leadership, most organizations, most leaders struggle with that because they want to have efficiency in quotes. They want to see outcomes achieved, and usually you don't say like, "Hey, I'm setting up this outcome for failure." And yet there are many people who've talked about the fact that actually trying to set up risky outcomes can have huge positive benefits, but not always writ large. Usually those are
Right.
sort of structured and put into some sort of confine of, whether it's a time box or a spend or investment. Usually it's structured. So I actually do feel as though I'm seeing some really interesting behaviors where people are feeling some threat. They're not sure what's going to happen with their job, but at the same time, they're going and trying it themselves to see what's possible. And I do feel as though I'm reading about new problems being tackled that weren't being tackled previously because there's a little bit of capacity to go forth and do so. And it suggests to me at least that there's some bottom up here that's necessary. It just we can't look to the top and expect everything's going to get figured out. There's got to be, I think there has to be some agency amongst people who know their own job, understand how their job works, to go and try things and see what's possible, and then advocate up. I don't know if that
Absolutely.
resonates.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, um, there is a mix. I think there's a mix. The culture has to sustain and provide the option for employees to do that experimentation. And there has to be, some reward and recognition for when employees do that experimentation and can bring about, a new solution or tool that was not something that was, a known use case, if we will. Having a good employee suggestion program or a full-fledged innovation program. For a while, I was, on a temporary assignment to the Department of Transportation. And when I was there, I was involved in, innovation. Um, and it was really interesting to just kind of be able to see the process of how DOT was doing it. And I think if organizations take an approach of saying we have an innovation program where there's a means for employees to come forward saying, hey, here's an idea, here's how I think it would make our operations better, and to provide, the corporate structure to analyze the efficacy of that suggestion in a rigorous way, can lead to adoption of solutions. But again, there has to be that culture of, hey, we allow for experimentation. So you're right. There's going to be, and there needs to be support for the bottom up. And there are going to be some super interested employees who, outside of work hours, go home and play with these things just because, they enjoy learning and have an interest in AI and bring that outside learning into the organization. But, most folks, for whatever seven reason, could be life, could be, just not feeling comfortable with technology in general, need a little bit more sort of the top down, like, okay, we, the organization, want our employees to start playing around with AI. So we're going to develop a corporate policy. We're going to train on that policy. We're going to train on basic fundamentals of what is AI. We're going to train on different types of tools that may be relevant to the types of employees that we have. Those sorts of things, need to be provided by the organization.
How much of this has really changed, though? I mean, so if we
Oh,
were to
17%
substitute
have a
mobile,
policy.
well, and this is exactly what I'm thinking. Like,
For 40 some odd percent of employees are saying, hey, I'm being asked to go forth and do all of this stuff with AI, but nobody's given me any training. Am I doing something?
right, and
Not
and
doing anything.
and even you can substitute AI with something else. You could substitute the word
Absolutely.
AI with mobile, or I don't know. You pick it. You could
The history
substitute.
is the same. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels the same, but at the same time, it doesn't. And I think to me the difference though is the existential bit. So on the one hand, that same tension exists in the which makes a lot of sense to me. people need help. Like even the most creative person, you still need some amount of help and clarity. And also, we have a history of telling people very clearly not to get outside their lanes. Like this is a thing.
Right.
Like this is
Right.
your job. Stay in your lane. Well,
Right.
you're going to have to get outside your lane if you're going to truly experiment. So this tension of, how do I adopt? How do I go forward? How do I experiment? Then overlays with the tension of what about my job? Like what about this larger, is something just going to happen tomorrow that I didn't expect? So I don't know if there
Yeah.
isn't a simple answer to this, but that's the place that it feels like AI makes it different than just in quotes a normal transition.
Yeah. I mean, I think even with some of the other technologies that you mentioned, that there, has been a concern about displacement, right?
Hmm.
You go forth and you experiment yourself out of a job because you come up with such a great solution, it gets adopted, and we just need less people. CEO of Salesforce made a comment that people really, took umbrage with, which was, talking about, frontline, customer service people, we can do with less heads. If I'm working customer service at Salesforce, I don't want to be referred to as a head, and to know that you're going to need fewer heads because you're using AI, well, there's been some research shown that when people feel threatened by AI, that they will go out of their way to sabotage it so it's not
Yeah, to
effective.
make it look bad.
Yeah, yeah, make it look like it's malfunctioning, like there's a lot of different ways that the use of AI can be inappropriate or not what the organization wants. And if the organization is trying to truly implement AI, and employees are concerned, like, hey, I'm teaching the AI to be able to replace me, they're not going to help you, dear organization, with your AI plans. They're gonna, exercise some self-preservation and sabotage it. It just there really has to be a conscious understanding of what is the goal of the AI. It should not be to replace, it should be to augment. And I think even the LMM providers are saying, like, at this stage of where we are with the technology, there really are very few things that AI can truly fully replace a human on. And so it's thinking about AI as a helper, an assistant, be it embodied or not embodied, with, embodied being your friendly little robot who can give you answers on things. Um, but, it really looking at it in terms of what is the goal of the AI? How is it, making a difference to the delivery of service to the customer? And how does the customer feel about it? I mean, going back to this Salesforce example, if I'm a customer of sale, someone who's using the Salesforce product or Salesforce directly, and I've got a question and I'm interacting with this bot, and I keep getting an answer that's not an answer to the question I'm asking, I'm dissatisfied. I'm angry at a certain point, and maybe I'm looking for a different solution altogether. So you can't think that there's always going to be a bot only answer. At some point, you can only let the customer fail so many times before you can get them to a human who can really sort of listen and understand and work through the nuances of what the concerns are. And AI is not really good at nuances yet.
Yet. I think this is interesting. The other is that the service you're unhappy with actually may not be Salesforce. It may be someone else in between. You don't actually know where that agent came from. It could be
Right.
someone else, may not be Salesforce, maybe some other organization.
Right.
Your unhappiness is going to be with that first line, not the second, third, or fourth. But I think this goes back to this ethical question about data and our responsibility as we're rolling out AI capabilities, what we're building, the types of agents we're building, and where we're building them. It's not just on the consumer to have to go fend for themselves. I think there is a responsibility of the builder as
Well,
well
absolutely
to go
not.
figure out what are we
Absolutely.
building. Yeah,
Yeah, it's what are we building? And why are we building it?
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it's there's lots of cool things that could be done and that are being done with AI, but not everything is appropriate. And I think the one that I've been really sort of advocating, like, whoa, wait a minute, has been around psychological services. Um, the AI therapist. I don't think so. I absolutely don't think so. It's like, yes, it's possible to build it. Yes, it's been built. There are multiple companies that have built their version of the AI therapist. And the problem with that is, in very short order, the AI will convince someone or will try to convince someone that they would be better off ending it. There's been, unfortunately, a case of, a young man who, took his own life after interacting with, the bot. Um, there's just, just because you can build it doesn't mean it should be built. And I think the thing that's even highlighted in this example is the importance of the human having expertise, regardless of whatever the particular, application of the bot or an actual full-fledged agent. You need people involved to make certain that it is still working as intended. To have those check and balances along the way, to check the outputs, over time, to challenge the AI to see if at some point it will, kind of go in a direction that you don't want it to go. And so having humans be involved is not something that's going to go away, even in terms of the build. Now, including the humans up front who have, the technical knowledge, I think is important. And when I mean technical knowledge, I don't mean like, the technology. I mean the
Subject matter
expertise in it.
experts.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. Having
I
them
absolutely
involved in the
agree.
beginning is critical.
And actually, we're seeing that. The company I'm in has been very focused on developers, but we very early had to bring in subject matter experts, and we had to build for these additional people that were going to be involved in articulating what are the behaviors that are expected. And so we saw that very early. And I very much agree. I also think that it's hard to paint with a broad brush. So I agree with all the things you just articulated about therapy. Well, actually, I think you named it very well with like the sort of health services and whatnot. Um, but there are types of conversation where it's useful to have that feedback where
Yes.
the risk is not disproportionate. And so having the mirror on the other side and this mirror having access to, a wealth of sociology papers or a wealth of information about, corporate dynamics or other such things could actually end up making for a very good first line, first touch mentor or a person to help you sort through a difficult situation,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
but not what you should use to have a different kind of conversation. And yet today, many of those things may blur. We may mix some of those together. So now we have to get in there and be more nuanced about how we slice and how we divide, which makes it even more important to get the subject matter expert to define that line, because who else would know that the line exists and when you've crossed it?
Exactly. Exact. That's an excellent point, and 100% agree that having the right expert at the right time throughout the process is critical. Um, but I will say, 321 Circle has a product called Community Go. And one aspect of that product, in addition to having forums and groups where employees can come together and self-learn, either for professional or personal development, there's a bot component. And the bot basically will accept questions, relating to wellness. But there's a big difference between, what's my prognosis? Do
Right.
I have this? Do I have this, psychological disorder? Just that's a no-go, I think. I think, giving people enough information about what a particular illness could be is different than saying
You have
exactly,
or you
exactly,
exhibit. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
But at the same time, as people building these different tools, we don't always control what humans throw at the agent. And so we also
And
need to
that's why
build
you
in
have to
layers
do
of
that
protection.
regular. Yeah, yeah, that's why you have to do that. It's not like you build it once, deploy it, and walk away. It's like it's ongoing fine tuning to see, like the unexpected surprise that, some end user, got it to do something you didn't think it could do because they, were smart enough to kind of ask it in a way that you didn't think to ask it, and it gave an answer.
And I think it goes back to the earlier conversation as well about the data. So we don't always understand how the data will intersect. And so that question that comes in might cause the system to pull together information that was otherwise unexpected, but is available, but was
Mhm.
unexpected. And now suddenly they've, you know, for positive or ill, they now have an answer that's bringing together two corpuses of data that were maybe not intentionally stitched together or not intentionally aligned, and meant to be used in that particular manner. And you can imagine all sorts
Well,
of use
yeah,
cases like that.
and I think to your point, the way in which, well, I mean, there's, your bots need to be grounded. If someone is asking, an objective answer, a question that has an objective answer,
Hmm.
um, then it should be grounded to a document, a corporate document where that lives, or, a particular corporate database where that lives. And so there's not generative AI being used, per se, in that, even though it's an AI, agent or bot. So, keeping the distinction between, like, we're talking about AI versus Gen AI, is important, because sometimes, you just need it grounded to correct document versus you want it to show a little bit more flexibility, dynamic response, that would be in the Gen AI category. It's all about what you use to train your particular, customization of your AI to get your particular bot in question, and making certain that you're picking the right, documents, you're picking the right databases, you're picking the right fields. Because even if you're going to give it, a database, maybe it doesn't get access to every field.
The whole thing, sure.
Yeah,
Only certain
yeah.
elements,
So
and
it's
maybe some connective tissue is intentionally left out so that you
exactly,
can't bridge from A to B.
exactly.
Um, so
But I saw something that was really, really interesting. And this was just yesterday, where there was a study that was done talking about it only takes as few as 250 documents for a backdoor to be created in an AI
interesting,
agent. So the
interesting.
whole idea of safeguarding the data is even more, um, of a concern. And going back to the idea of, like, having an employee, willfully sabotage the AI effort, you go around, asking, hey, can you give me your documents, give me your documents, give me your documents. And, they nefariously bury some line, that is in line with their manifesto of how the organization should operate in one of these documents. And you do that only 250 times, and you've got, a potential security breach in your bot that you didn't know was possible. So that has a lot of people sort of scratching their heads and thinking, like, well, wait a minute, um,
You're
when I saw
reinforcing
that, I
it.
was thinking about, like, the idea of having a back door, so just, there really does have to be the corporate policy. There really does have to be an understanding by the employees. So again, training on that, having the policy, training on the policy, in addition to training on specific AI tools that you want your employees to use, but even just broader training, because, we're I think somebody's taking for granted that everyone's operating at a level they really kind of understand what an LLM is. And I don't, that's not widely
Oh,
known.
certainly
But
not.
yeah, like the very basics of, like, hey, what is AI, is, like, needed in a lot of organizations. So there's many different tracks of AI training that's necessary. But you can't ding someone for breaking, a policy that you didn't have written down.
Yeah, yeah. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't have it. I mean, so
That's
this
right.
is this is an interesting area. I I would love to wrap up by asking a question about, and I think actually you've been alluding to this all through, but about human skills and what we need to focus on ourselves to be ready and to really sort of embrace this world that's coming with language models and AI and everything else. And what do you think it like if you were to boil it all down, which I'm sure is hard, but what would you focus on in terms of like the human skill you think people need to really work on?
Um, Adaptability.
Hmm.
Say being adaptable. The change is here. It's that the only constant is change. And just being able to learn how to learn, you
Oh,
know,
interesting.
really being able to kind of dig in where you need to try and teach yourself what you need to teach yourself. Because the organizations have an obligation to provide training, but they're not doing it. But at the same time, they're expecting their employees to be using AI. So if you're sort of caught in that, catch 22, you need to figure it out, until your organization can get their ducks in a row and start providing, the training that they should be providing. And even if it's not a matter of your job where you are now, it's like where are you going to go? It's like
Right.
what's next for you. So you need to always be looking for how can I improve? What's next? What do I need to know for me to remain, I don't want to say competitive, but able to contribute to the organization that I'm in now and where I may want to go. So I would say that that's the main thing. People aren't going to get replaced right away. There is going to be augmentation, but you as an individual need to know how to work in the way with the AI so that you can get it to do what you want it to do. So that's what I would say.
It's amazing learning how to learn. I think in many respects, people actually are taught to stop learning.
Yeah.
They're taught to accept and just do the thing that they're supposed to do and follow. And I agree with you that both the curiosity and adaptability that you're referring to understand and just try doing something differently and not being afraid to do that. These are um, not simple skills to ask people to suddenly turn on overnight. I think
Yeah.
we could
And
all,
curiosity is huge. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we could all do well to have to emphasize that everywhere we can and make it acceptable, make it okay to have people question ideas and question what's going on around them, both inside the corporate and outside. So I love it. Romella, thank you. Great conversation today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.